Where the roots hold, the kingdom heals. In the last story, the long-awaited reckoning began. Odysseus cast aside the disguise of the beggar, struck down Antinous with his first arrow, and with Telemachus beside him turned the suitors' feast into a field of justice. Though outnumbered, father, son, Eumaeus, and Philoetios held the doorway like a wall of bronze, while Athena watched over them in the form of Mentor and turned the enemy's spears aside. One by one the proud men who had consumed the house of Odysseus fell among overturned tables and spilled wine, their laughter ending in terror. Yet in the midst of slaughter, Telemachus also showed the wisdom of a prince, saving the innocent bard Phemios and the herald Medon from blind vengeance. When silence returned, the hall was covered in blood, dust, and broken pride. The usurpers were gone, the king stood victorious, and Ithaca had begun to remember its true master. We have reached the Odyssey's end, Book 23 and Book 24. The war ends, the wandering ends. But Homer refuses to end the story with a kiss and a curtain. He ends it with recognition, proof, memory, and peace forced into the human throat by the gods. This is the last room of the Odyssey, and like all last rooms, it is not only about reunion. It is about what survives reunion. Euryclea, the nurse who held Odysseus when he was a child, runs up, knees aching, heart young, and wakes Penelope with a sentence that should end the epic. Odysseus is here. Wake. Wake up, dear child. Penelope, come down. See with your own eyes what all these years you longed for. Odysseus is herald. In the end, he camel. And he has killed your suitors, killed them all. Who made his house a bordel and ate his cattle, and raised their hands against his soul. But Penelope does not rise like a bride in a poem. She rises like a woman who has been trained by 20 years of disappointment. Her first instinct is not romance, her first instinct is intelligence. She says, almost cruelly, "Dear nurse, the gods have touched you. They can put chaos into the clearest head, or bring a lunatic down to earth. Good sense, you always had. They've touched you. What is this? Mockery you wake me up to tell me, breaking in on my sweet spell of sleep. I had not dozed away so tranquilly, since my lord went to war, on that ill wind, to Ehon. Because this is how trauma speaks, hope becomes suspicious. Notice something important, Penelope is not even shocked by the slaughter when she hears of it. She is focused on one question, is it true? Penelope agrees to go down, not to embrace, but to verify. She comes down the stairs and sits across by the firelight, against the wall, as if the distance itself is a test. Odysseus waits, he does not beg. He has learned something on the sea, real recognition cannot be demanded. Telemachus cannot tolerate this. He explodes. Mother, cruel mother, do you feel nothing, drawing yourself apart this way from father? Will you not sit with him and talk and question him? What other woman could remain so cold? Who shuns her lord, and he come back to her, from wars and wandering, after 20 years? Your heart is hard as flint and never changes 1 inch. Penelope answered, I am stunned, child. I cannot speak to him. I cannot question him. I cannot keep my eyes upon his face. If really he is Odysseus, truly home, beyond all doubt we two shall know each other, better than you or anyone. There are secret signs we know, we two. A smile came now to the lips of the patient hero, Odysseus, who turned to Telemachus and said, Peace, let your mother test me at her leisure. Telemachus wants the house to be whole again, instantly, like a snapped thread being tied. But Penelope answers with one of the most important sentences of the epic, if he is truly Odysseus. We have signs we too know. Penelope has lived among predators wearing manners like masks. If she runs to the wrong man, she loses everything, her body, her authority, her son's future, and her own soul. So she looks at Odysseus, sees only blood and rags, because identity, in the Odyssey, is always a problem of appearance. Now Odysseus does something so clever it feels almost wicked. He orders bathing, fresh clothing, and the bard's music, a wedding sound in a house that is actually a slaughterhouse. Anyone passing on the road would say, married at last, I see, the queen so many courted. Sly, caddish wife. She would not keep, not shall, the lord's estate until he came. So travelers, thoughts might run but no one guessed the truth. Why? Because the outside world is not ready for truth. If the town hears massacre, they will hear civil war. So he makes the house sound like celebration so that the truth has time to settle into strategy. Then Odysseus bathes. Athena lent him beauty and make him taller, radiant, almost unfairly beautiful. Still Penelope does not melt, Odysseus, wounded by the distance. He sat then in the same chair by the pillar facing his silent wife, and said, "Strange woman. The immortals of Olympus made you hard. Harder than any. Who else in the world would keep aloof as you do from her husband? He returned to her from years of trouble, cast on his own land in the 20th year. Nurse, make up a bed for me to sleep on. Her heart is iron in her breast." Penelope spoke to Odysseus now. She said, "Strange man. If man you are, this is no pride on my part, nor scorn for you, not even wonder, merely. I know so well how he appeared, boarding the ship for Troy. But all the same, make up his bed for him, Euryclea." With this she tried him to the breaking point, and he turned on her in a flash ragiag, "Woman, by heaven you have stung me now, who dared to move my bed? No builder had the skill for that, unless a god came down to turn the trick, our secret sign, built into that bed, my handiwork, and no one else's. An old trunk of olive, grew like a pillar on the building plot, and I laid out our bedroom round that tree, lined up the stone walls, built the walls and roof, gave it a doorway and smooth-fitting doors. I know no more. Could someone else's hand have sawn that trunk and dragged the frame away? Their secret." As she heard it told, her knees grew tremulous and weak, her heart failed her. With eyes brimmy tears she ran to him, throwing her arms around his neck, and kissed him, murmuring, "Do not rage at me, Odysseus. No one ever matched your caution. Think, what difficulty the gods gave, they denied us life together in our prime and flowering years, kept us from crossing into age together. Forgive me, don't be angry. I could not welcome you with love on sight. I armed myself long ago against the frauds of men, impostors who might come, and all those many whose underhanded ways bring evil on. Helen of Argos, daughter of Zeus and Leda, would she have joined the stranger, lain with him, if she had known her destiny? Known the Achans in arms would bring her back to her own country? Surely a goddess moved her to adultery, her blood unchilled by war and evil coming, the years, the desolation, ours too. But here and now, what sign could be so clear as this of our own bed? No other man has ever laid eyes on it, only my own slave, Actorus, that my father sent with me as a gift. She kept our door. You make my stiff heart know that I am yours." Odysseus weeps, Penelope weeps, and Homer compares the reunion to a man crawling alive onto shore after shipwreck. They go to bed, they talk. Penelope tells the siege of the house. Odysseus tells the siege of the sea. And then Odysseus reveals what many readers forget: Tiresias' prophecy is still pending. He must carry an oar inland until someone mistakes it for a winnowing fan, means until he reaches people who do not know the sea. Meaning, even after the Odyssey ends, Odysseus must learn to live in a world that does not speak his language. And Penelope replies with quiet grace, "If the gods allow kind old age, then peace will come." While the halls of Ithaca were being cleansed above the earth, another procession moved below it. Hermes of Cyllene, guide of souls, came with his golden wand, the staff by which he closes the eyes of men or wakes them as he wills. With the motion of that wand, he summoned the ghosts of the slain suitors. They rose thin and trembling, squeaking like bats in a cavern, flitting in confusion through the dark. So the young men who had laughed loudly in life now moved speechless in death. Hermes led them down the old roads of Hades. There stood the mighty dead of Troy, Peleus, Patroclus, Antilochus, and great Aias. Nearby was Agamemnon, still shadowed by the memory of betrayal in his own house. When Agamemnon saw the newly dead among them, he recognized Amphimedon of Ithaca and called, "Amphimedon, what ruin brought you here? All in a body, picked men, and so young." Amphimedon answered with the honesty death sometimes grants. He told how Penelope had delayed them with her loom, weaving by day and undoing by night. He told how Odysseus returned in rags, unknown even to older men. He told how they mocked him in his own hall, cursed him, struck at him, and failed to know the king standing before them. Then came the contest of the bow. Not a man could bend the stiff bow to his will, he said, until it reached Odysseus. He bent it effortlessly. Then he killed Antinous. He spoke of arrows falling like judgment, of blood on the floor, of a god fighting beside Odysseus. He ended with the bitterest truth: their bodies still lay unattended in Ithaca, without washing, mourning, or rites. Then Agamemnon cried aloud, "O fortunate Odysseus, master mariner and soldier! The girl you brought home made a valiant wife, Penelope, faithful daughter of Icarios. The gods themselves will sing her story for men on earth." And then, remembering his own murder at the hands of Clytemnestra, he contrasted the two women, one faithful in absence, one treacherous in welcome. Homer places Penelope beside the ruined marriages of myth to show that fidelity is itself heroic. Meanwhile, above the earth, Odysseus had not yet found rest. He went from the city toward the old orchard lands of Laertes, lands won long ago from wilderness by toil. There he found his father alone, bent with age, wearing patched clothes, digging around a young fruit tree with his own hands. Grief had reduced the once kingly man to a solitary gardener. Odysseus stopped beneath a pear tree and wept in secret. Then he debated with himself: should he run forward and embrace him at once, or test him first? As so often, he chose Medes, the path of careful intelligence. He approached as a stranger and said, "Old man, the orchard keeper you work for has a good eye for growing things. But tell me, is this Ithaca? And do you know a man named Odysseus, son of Laertes?" Laertes lifted his head, and tears filled his eyes. He spoke of his lost son as one long dead, perhaps eaten by fish or birds, unmourned and unburied. Every word pierced Odysseus more sharply than bronze. At last he could bear no more. He leapt forward, embraced the old man, kissed him, and cried, "Oh, father, I am he. 20 years gone, and here I've come again, to my own land. Hold back your tears, I bring good news. I killed the suitors to the last man." Laertes, still uncertain, asked for proof. Odysseus showed first the scar made by the boar on Parnassus. Then he named the orchard gifts of childhood. "You gave me 13 pear trees, 10 apple trees, 40 fig trees, and 50 rows of vines." Memory became recognition. The old man's knees failed him, and he fainted into his son's arms. When he revived, joy and fear mixed together. "Zeus above, you still rule Olympus. But now all Ithaca will be upon us." For already in the town, grief had become anger. Fathers mourned sons, brothers mourned brothers. Eupeithes, father of Antinous, rose in assembly burning for revenge. "Up with you! After him! If we do not avenge our son's blood, life would turn to ashes." Yet Medon the herald stood before them and told what he had seen. The immortal gods were not far off. Someone divine fought beside Odysseus, in the shape and dress of Mentor. Then the seer Laertes warned them, "By your own fault these deaths came to pass. You would not put down the riot of your sons. Let matters rest. No chase." Some listened, many did not. Rage is often louder than wisdom. Armed men gathered and marched toward Laertes' farm. At that same time Athena asked Zeus whether bloodshed must continue. Zeus answered that Odysseus' honor had been satisfied, now peace should come, and memory of slaughter be blotted out. So while the meal was being prepared in Laertes' house, a lookout cried, "Here they come, best arm ourselves, and quickly." Odysseus armed, Telemachus armed, 2 herdsmen armed, even Laertes took up bronze once more. Athena came again in Mentor's form and put courage in them. Odysseus said to his son, "Telemachus, you are going into battle, where hearts of men are tried. Bring no shame upon your forefathers." The young prince answered, "If you are curious, father, watch and see the stuff that's in me." Then Athena turned to Laertes and urged him to throw. Strength flowed into the old man. He cast his spear, and it struck Eupeithes through the helmet. Antinous' father fell, armor clanging on the earth. Odysseus and Telemachus charged forward. They would have cut the townsmen down to the last man. But then Athena cried out, "Now hold. Break off this bitter skirmish. End your bloodshed, Ithacans, and make peace." At the same instant Zeus hurled a thunderbolt before her feet. Odysseus halted. Athena looked at him and said, "Son of Laertes, command yourself. Call off this battle now." He obeyed gladly. Thus the Odyssey ends not in slaughter, but in settlement. Not with vengeance without limit, but with wrath brought back under law. Nostos, homecoming, is complete only when private justice yields to public peace. The bow restored the king. But only restraint restored the kingdom. Enuva, home beyond victory. The final two books of the Odyssey are not about defeating enemies. They are about answering a far more difficult question: what remains after victory? Homer refuses to end his epic with the fall of the suitors because reclaiming a house is easier than restoring a life. The battle is over, but the work of healing has only begun. The first lesson comes through Penelope. Euryclea rushes to her with the news every reader has waited 20 years to hear: Odysseus has returned. Yet Penelope does not run into his arms. She doubts. Some readers mistake this for coldness, but Homer presents it as wisdom. 20 years of deception have taught her that hope without proof is dangerous. She does not test Odysseus because she lacks love, she tests him because she has protected that love for 20 years. The secret of the olive tree bed is not simply a clever trick. It is the memory of a life that only husband and wife could share. Recognition, Homer tells us, is built upon shared memory, not appearance. Odysseus also teaches us something remarkable. Even after reclaiming his throne, he does not stop thinking like the man we have followed since Troy. He orders music to be played so that those outside the palace believe a wedding is taking place rather than a massacre. Even in victory, he chooses strategy over celebration. The warrior has won the battle, but the king is already protecting the kingdom. Book 24 shifts unexpectedly from the living to the dead. Homer leads the souls of the suitors into Hades, where Agamemnon hears the story of Penelope's faithfulness. The contrast is deliberate. Agamemnon returned to betrayal, Odysseus returned to fidelity. Homer places Penelope beside the great women of Greek myth and quietly declares that steadfastness is as heroic as any victory won in battle. The reunion with Laertes completes another journey. Father and son recognize each other not through words alone, but through memories of an old scar and the trees of an orchard planted long ago. Once again, Homer reminds us that identity lives in memory. A family is restored not by blood alone, but by the shared history that only love can preserve. Yet even now the epic refuses to end with revenge. The families of the slain suitors gather for another battle. Violence threatens to begin again. Only Athena, with Zeus' command, stops the cycle before it consumes Ithaca once more. This is Homer's final lesson. Justice cannot become endless vengeance. If every death demands another death, no kingdom will ever know peace. That is why the Odyssey ends not with an arrow, but with restraint. Odysseus obeys Athena and lowers his weapon. The man who spent 20 years fighting for home finally learns that preserving peace requires greater wisdom than winning war. The journey that began with Troy ends not in triumph, but in harmony. Nostos is fulfilled because Odysseus has returned. Xenia is restored because the house has been cleansed. Kleos endures because his name is remembered not only for courage, but for wisdom. Let us end the Odyssey with one final thought. A hero returns home by courage. A king remains home by wisdom. And a civilization endures only when justice finally gives way to peace. This is where the Odyssey closes its doors. This book is a creation of Shweta Mahendra from series of Shweta's Fabula and Mythos, Enuva. May your own olive tree, whatever you have built with truth, remain rooted through every storm.